Good afternoon. I sounded really boring when I just heard myself introduced, so I'm gonna add to that by insulting you. And unlike Deborah, I'm a bit of a capitalist myself, and I have to say that I own some P&G stock, and if you've been paying attention, your stock is down about 10% in the past month. But, and this is quite relevant, Benjamin Graham, who is the mentor of Warren Buffett, who is probably the most well-known investor today alive, said that in the short term, the stock market is a voting machine, but in the long term, it's a weighing machine. In the short term, it's a voting machine, but in the long term, it's a weighing machine. What Benjamin Graham, mentor to Warren Buffett, meant by that was in the short term, noise affects stock prices, goofy things affect stock prices, but in the long term, what really matters is the value of the company. And I tell you, actually, Warren Buffett owns a lot of Procter & Gamble stock. I also own it, and I have a long-term view. And what I ask you to do is to have a long-term view about yourself. And I make a small request. If you have a long-term view about yourself, then you won't be looking at your phone right now. You'll be looking at me, and you'll listen to me. And what I'm going to tell you is I'm going to tell you some noise. I'm going to paint a picture, and I'm just going to randomly tell you stuff. But at the end, it seems to me that I'll give you something that's worth the 10 minutes of your time, if you have a long-term view. And if you have a short-term view, then I will just do my best to entertain you, despite my boring bio that you heard. And a lot of it has to do with this picture behind me. And the picture behind me is something many of you have seen before. It's one of the more famous visual illusions that represents ambiguity. So it's a typical ambiguous image. When you look at it, you can see a duck looking this way. Another possibility is you can see a rabbit that's looking that way. This is the famous duck-rabbit image. And my talk is largely about the duck-rabbit. And the way I will frame it is by being very pretentious and didactic and evoking an old Austrian philosopher called Wittgenstein. And Wittgenstein said, I like the way he said things, he said, the world of the happy man is very different from the world of the unhappy man. The world of the happy man is very different from the world of the unhappy man. And what I'm going to try to convince you of is that there's some truth to that, I believe. There's some value of connecting that with the duck rabbit. And there's also a little bit of a fix for it. And if you give me your attention, I will try to give you that fix. And that's what could pay off, I think, in the long term. Now, before I came up here, I was drinking out of a little coffee cup of some Japanese coffee. Whenever I go to Japan, I love the vending machines on the street. It's one of the things I look forward to when I go there, and I happened to have one of those, and I was drinking out of it today. And I met one of your Japanese colleagues, and I leaned over when I was drinking it, and I said, this is my favorite thing about Japan. And a colleague next to me, one of your colleagues, was startled. And I realized, well, I don't really mean that this is my favorite thing about Japan, this coffee. And she said, good, because I just judged you unfavorably. And I think rightfully so. And what I'm going to try to do is I'm going to try to connect that with Warren Buffett, with the duck rabbit, with the world of the happy man is very different from the world of the unhappy man. And that's about the investment that could pay off in the long run. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to do it by giving you a lesson about teaching. I'm a teacher, and while teaching, I've learned a bit about teaching, and so what I'm going to try to do is I'm going to try to teach you about teaching right now. I'm going to first ask you to use your imagination. I'm going to ask you to use your imagination and look out that window over there. Do me a favor, turn your head that way and look out that window. You're looking out there, and out there are a bunch of cows. Now you can see the cows just looking around, eating in the fields. And you see right in the center of them, there's a brown cow. You see him. You all can see him. He's right in the center. He's a brown cow, the one with the white sort of heart-shaped spot just on his nose. And what we're going to do is we're going to give that cow a name, and we're going to give that cow the name Chicken Rice. So that cow is now named Chicken Rice. What's the name of the cow? Chicken Rice. Chicken Rice. That's his name. So he's out there with all the other cows. His name is Chicken Rice. Now come back in the room. Now we go home tonight. Now we come back here tomorrow. And I ask you to do me a favor again. Play along. Look out the window. Now out there we see the cows, and amongst them, who do we see? Chicken rice. What we've just done is we've given a name to that cow. We've named him Chicken Rice. And so when we come back now, every time we look into the field, we see chicken rice out there. The brown cow with the white heart-shaped thing over his nose. And something has happened that we've given a name to something. And when we give a name, he jumps out at us. The other cows, we don't notice them, but we see chicken rice because we gave him a name. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you a name for what your colleague could have done with me when she thought that I was insulting Japan. And it's going to link to this picture, and we're going to name that cow, and if we name that cow successfully, then I think that's what can pay off in the long run. Now what's going to happen in about 10 minutes when I finish speaking, I told you that I'm random, it's all going to fall into place at the end, is you're going to get one of these little wristbands, and the wristband has it all on there. And what the wristband has, it has the name of the cow for us. And the name of the cow for us is the name of my talk. And the name of my talk is, this is the name of the cow, the principle of charity. So the reason why you're here, the reason why you're listening to this boring man who's published in some boring journals that no one ever reads, is because I'm going to name this cow for you the principle of charity. Now the first thing that I want you to realize, allow me to be philosophical for a second, it's that reality is quite ambiguous. When I said this is the favorite thing that I have about Japan, well, that's kind of a duck-rabbit situation. Allow me to speak to you metaphorically. You'll understand me perfectly. It's a duck-rabbit situation. It could be that I was saying, you know what, Japan is so lousy that the best thing about it is this $1.50 coffee that I can get from it. That's one possibility. Another possibility is that it was a slip of the tongue. What I was really saying is, you know what, I really like this coffee and it comes from Japan. By the way, you're sitting next to me and I have some coffee where the only characters on it are Japanese characters. Duck, insulting Japan, rabbit, making a remark, look, I have this, I'm trying to signal to you that I like your country and I even have something from it right now. I think a lot of our interactions are like that. You've had interactions with people today where they said things, you meet someone from the Manila office, you meet someone from the Singapore office, you're out there clustered together in your own regions. Occasionally you meet people and they say things, and occasionally the things that you say don't sound quite right to you. I heard that they were aggressive in Singapore. I came all the way here and I got insulted the first day. Maybe. But maybe what that person was saying was, you know what? Rabbit, rabbit. And you're nodding when they're talking to you, and you're hearing them say duck, and duck is sounding quite offensive to you. They intend to say rabbit, you're hearing duck, you're misunderstanding them, and you leave that conversation and you go back to your colleagues from the Manila office and you talk about how rude the Singaporeans are. And what just happened was a misunderstanding. The person meant one thing, you interpreted it another way, and a lot of our communication, a lot of our interactions have the ambiguous nature of this image. Now, what is the principle of charity? The name of the cow is the principle of charity. And what is that? I have a friend who says everything is either obvious or false. Everything is either obvious or false. Now, what I think I'm going to tell you is obvious. What I'm going to tell you right now is something that your grandmother told you. Your grandmother told you this. I'm not telling you anything remotely new or innovative or creative. I'm telling you something your grandmother told you, but we're doing something a little bit different. We're naming the cow, and when you name the cow, you see opportunities to apply it. What your grandmother told you was the principle of charity, but she didn't call it that. The principle of charity is that when you're confronted with these ambiguous situations, when you're interacting with someone, when you're hearing someone speak and it sounds like they're saying something stupid, for instance, or you're interacting with someone and it sounds like they're saying something rude or offensive, first of all, recognize that it's an ambiguous situation, that it's a duck-rabbit kind of situation. Step one. Step two, see if you can find an interpretation of what was said, what was done, that would actually make the person reasonable. What is the principle of charity? That's it. Recognize that reality is ambiguous, and then try to find what are called charitable interpretations. What are those? Just ones that would make the other person reasonable. The statistical assumption underlying this, if we want to be mathematical for a second, is that most of the time, most people don't say things that are stupid. Most people aren't that stupid. That's an assumption. I think it's a reasonable assumption. Another assumption is that, this isn't a statistical assumption, some people are, but the second assumption is that most people are not rude, that most people are actually okay, that they're not jerks. Now, there are exceptions, but those are my two assumptions. And so it's a good, safe statistical bet that, okay, reality is ambiguous. I'm faced with a decision problem. Do I interpret what was said, what was done in a way that is reasonable or jerkish? Well, I don't know. Reality is ambiguous. It's a duck rabbit. I think things are more likely to be not stupid and not jerkish. So a safe statistical bet is that it wasn't that. The principle of charity says, try to find that interpretation that would make the other person reasonable. Now, your grandmother told you something like, in your language it was different, but more or less it was the same. Give people the benefit of the doubt. The benefit of the doubt, I find, is not that sticky. The principle of charity, I found, it's like naming the cow chicken rice. If I called the cow Fred, I don't know if there are any Freds in here, but that's kind of a boring name, right? But I called him chicken rice. And so if I see you a year from now, I say, what was the name of the cow? You'll say chicken rice. I even ask you what he looks like. He was brown, had a white heart-shaped thing. For some reason, you got a visual image. For some reason, the principle of charity is much stickier than the benefit of the doubt. Now, what I need to do, first of all, is I need to give you more images. I need to make you realize that it's not so obvious and yeah, I do that already, because you don't use this. You do not think this way. If you're like most people, and most people are, then you don't think this way naturally. And so what I need to do is I need to plant some seeds in your mind to make you more likely to do this. And I'm going to do that by telling you a couple really boring, banal anecdotes. Why? Because I have a long-term view. I don't care if it sounds like I'm saying nonsense, because like Warren Buffett, I have a long-term view. Your stock is tanking, but I'm still going to buy it because I believe in your company. First story, true story. I'm glad my wife is not here. And if you meet her, don't tell her that I told you this story. She gets upset by it. There was a bookstore briefly in Ion Mall, which is on Orchard Roads, called Prologue Books at the top. When it first opened up in Singapore, it was probably 2009, I can't remember. They had a 20% off everything sale. My wife and I went there, and 20% off means that everyone in Singapore shows up there because they're, Kiazu, so everyone in Singapore is inside this bookshop, including me and my wife, and I buy a bunch of books. I like books, so I have an armful of books. There are 2 registers open, that's my recollection, so the queues are very, very long. So we're making our way to the front very slowly, and my wife, who's ordinarily very, very nice, starts getting upset. And she's going, look, what, look. Every time they get to the front, they're surprised that they have to pay. She said, imagine how much more efficient it would be if when people got to the front, they had their cash, their credit card ready, but instead, people are all surprised that they have to pay, and then they start fishing through their wallet. She said, imagine how efficient it would be if everyone was just ready. Sweetie, it's okay. It's not a big deal. Yeah. So we make our way up. She's like, look, another one. And then we get to the front, and I put my books down, and the cashier says it'll be $105. So I have 2 $100 bills in my pocket. I'm going to pay in cash. I take them out. I have them ready because I didn't want to anger my wife. And I'm giving them to him, and she goes, wait. She said, don't break that. I have some change. And she puts her books on the counter. She puts her purse on the floor. She goes into her purse. She takes out her wallet, and she starts counting out those $1 coins. And I'm going, sweetie, it's cool, don't, apologizing to the guy behind me. And then finally she does it, and I give it to the guy, I get my $100 back, and I'm thinking, I'm going to now really make the taxi uncle angry because he's going to have to break this. It's not looking good. And finally we leave, and I say to my wife, we're walking, I said, what was that about? What are you talking about? I said, the whole time you're upset with all of those people not ready, and the most important thing in the world was that we didn't break this, which now we need to break because otherwise we're not going to be able to get home. What are you talking about? So what happened was when we were in the back of the line, there were all these people. Oh, they're like that. Then we got to the front, and reality shifted, and a whole different set of considerations came into play. They look like fools, but we're reasonable people. A second example. How many of you are going to get on a plane in the next month? A lot of you. Here's what's going to happen. With probability as close to 1 as possible, this is what's going to happen. It's going to be less likely to happen if you're paying attention to me right now. The people on their phone right now, this is what's going to happen to them. They're going to be getting on the plane with their carry-on, and then there's going to be a guy in front of them who stops. That same Dutch guy with the Candy Crush. And he's going to stop, and he's going to start looking for a place to put his bag. But it's full. And it's full. And now I just turned into Deborah for a second. Look at what happened. And he's going to take the pillow out, but that's not enough room. And then he's going to move Deborah's backpack over, but there's not enough room. And the people on their phones are going to be looking at him going, what is going on? Can't he just scoot over for a second? But they're not going to say anything, but they're going to get really frustrated. And then finally he's going to see it. He's going, oh, sorry. And he's going to back in. He's going to hit Deborah with his behind. And then the person on their phone right now is going to walk past. And then she's going to get to her seat. And she's going to look up. And it's going to be full. And she's going to move the pillow, but that's not enough room. Then she's going to move the backpack, but that's not enough room. And then one of you listening to me right now is going to be standing behind her. Instead of looking at her with contempt and going, look at this fool, you're going to smile. And you're going to go, I've been her before. I know that I've done that. Why? Because I'm going to be honest with myself for a second. And isn't it funny how now, for this person, the most important thing in the world for her seems to be finding a place for her little bag. Look how important it is to her. And you're going to smile. And you're going to say, principle of charity. She's not a fool. She's not unreasonable. Why? Because I've done that before. And instead of getting your blood pressure high and thinking that everyone is a fool and an idiot and just getting into that bad travel moods, you're going to look at the bracelet. I'm going to give you one of these. And you're just going to have a moment and you're going to enjoy it. And so what's the long-term investment? The long-term investment is if you realize that reality is a duck rabbit like that, either she can be a fool or she can be someone who's panicking over something that really doesn't matter that much right now and you can laugh at it. The long-term investment is to say, do I want to get upset or do I want to live my life well? I'm going to remember, if my assumption is correct, and I think that it is, that reality is ambiguous, that it's subject to interpretation. So I face a decision problem right now. How am I going to interpret it? Because the way I interpret it is going to affect the way I experience things. And the way I experience things determines how I'm going to live life between now and the fat, balder, more wrinkly version of myself in 30 years. And I personally want that to be a good life. The world of the happy man is very different from the world of the unhappy man. Now, your grandmother told you to give people the benefit of the doubt, but you probably haven't been doing that. We don't tend to do that. But I've tried to help you by naming the cow. Not chicken rice, forget about him, but this, the principle of charity. What is it? In a nutshell, it's very simple. Recognize that reality is ambiguous, it's a duck rabbit, and see if you can find an interpretation that's charitable that would make what's going on reasonable. And I think if you have that kind of long-term view and don't just get upset by the noise in the moment, then your stock price won't tank like Procter & Gamble's is right now. And it'll be very nice in the long run, like I believe it will be. That's why I'm buying it right now. So what is the phrase? What is the name of the cow? Thank you very much.